Hey, here we are again, Businessology Show. I'm Jason, I'm your host. These are shows where we want to help agencies just figure out growth, kind of navigate the complexities of growth. Sometimes we'll have agency owners, we'll have experts kind of talk us through this. And everybody's going to know our guest today, Tim Williams, the author of one of my most foundational books, one of the greatest influences probably on how we built our business probably a decade ago, Positioning for Professionals, is just one of a number of the books he's written. And just to introduce, he is, if you don't know him, is a globally recognized expert in the places of positioning and pricing for agencies. Actually, larger agencies is who he works with. And he has been interviewed on sites like The Economist, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Bloomberg News, The Guardian. I mean, all over Europe and Asia. Before the pandemic, he traveled all the time, always doing conferences, always working with agencies all over the world. And again, wrote Positioning for Professionals, Take a Stand for Your Brand. His blog, Propulsion, is one of my favorite reads. That's one of the ones that sits in your inbox until you get to it. And his writing on LinkedIn is also some of the great work that you really just have to sign up for. So, Tim, thank you so much for being on the Businessology Show. We appreciate you. Thanks again for being here.
Well, thank you. It's one of my favorite things to do, spend time with you, Jason.
Well, Tim, that's very kind of you. So I hope it's true. Some things I was thinking through in bringing you on the show. I mean, you're the person to talk through this. Is really just broadly what is growth, kind of getting into that, and then kind of moving into the pandemic. And really, you see a lot of patterns in the agency space, and I want to dive into those with you. So, but first, let's talk about just growth more broadly. A lot of times growth, I think people think that means get more revenue, but a lot of people challenge us when we're teaching them, and they're like, I don't want to go get more revenue, so can I still grow? So what does growth mean, or what can it mean, I guess, to creative agencies that are trying to grow?
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful comment, that there are different kinds of growth. It doesn't just mean revenue, right? Growing profit would be more important. Personal growth,
for sure.
Growing the expertise of your firm, because as we all know, it's fairly easy to buy growth, and large companies do this all the time. With pricing strategies, they buy market share, and I'm a bit of a renegade when it comes to this topic. I mean, I subscribe to the idea that of our friend Ron Baker, growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell. It's
Wow.
not in its own right. It's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, it can be, but I believe that growth is hazardous to business strategy, basically.
Ooh,
because
wow, that's a big statement.
Too much growth, it takes your eye off the ball. You start to, if you look at the behavior of people and companies that are clearly chasing growth, it's quite different from the behavior and patterns of companies that are trying to grow in a more conscious way, to grow more carefully. And I submit that most of us would want to work for the company that is being a lot more conscious about growth. We want to grow in the right ways.
Yeah.
So there's healthy growth and unhealthy growth. We want to grow for the right reasons, not for the sake of it.
Yeah. Does that mean growth should always be slow? Like if you say methodical, does that mean be slow when you grow revenue, let's say?
I mean, generally, I think that's true. Many of us have had the experience of the big behemoth gorilla client that just comes in and overwhelms the firm, and makes us lose our focus. I mean, I've seen some firms make the decision not to take a client like that. They're afraid of what it would do to their culture. So I'm a fan of slow, I guess that's the right term, deliberate growth. Let's put it that way. I mean, on its own, it's neither a good thing or a bad thing. It's like the famous the agency Chiat Day that did, that still does the Apple work and did the famous, 1984 commercial. Jay Chiat, when he was asked, well, Jay, how big do you want to get? And he said, well, I want to get as big as I can before I get bad. And, and so, there's a limit to how good you can be and still also grow.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I think a lot of people forget that an agency or a firm, in the places we work, those are, they're human organizations, right? They're just made up of human service, human leadership, and so more revenue means those structures have to keep up with that revenue. Similarly, a culture has to be maintained and all that, and that's just difficult to do. So I think we often forget what revenue can do to the inside of our company, and those have to kind of be balanced as you get bigger. And so methodical seems like the best way, or deliberate seems like the best way to do that.
Yeah.
And I guess, but you've seen examples where people get that wrong. And is it generally a revenue wrong? Like we let too much revenue in too fast, too complex, the wrong revenue. Are those the wrong revenue choices that typically wreck companies or can wreck companies?
Yeah, I think of the dynamics you just went through, I think wrong revenue would be top of my list. This idea that not every dollar is a good dollar, and if the client is a wrong fit, either they're not the core market that we know, and they don't want the core services that we offer. They want something else, and we scramble to try and figure it out, which happens all the time. Then that just leads to internal frustration and people starting to, eventually hate the client. Nobody wants to work on it, and it becomes this albatross. So, yeah, I think the wrong kind of revenue is the most important point there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And because I know we've talked about it on another show before, but the wrong kind of revenue, once it comes into your agency, is so hard to get rid of, right? So a lot of times we tell people that front door is your most strategic door to your firm. The back door, you can use it whenever you need to. Rarely do people open their back door, but what they do is leave their front door just hanging wide open, and anybody stumbles into the company and they go, how the heck did you get in here? And they cause a lot of problems when they come in an undeliberate way.
Yeah, and just a related point, our tendency to want to chase revenue and consider growth as a good thing in its own right really produces this phenomenon where a client, and this is the definition, I think, of a wrong client. The client doesn't want necessarily what we do. They want something that's on the periphery, something that's kind of related, something that's kind of close. And so then we have to scramble to develop these services that are really not core to our strategy. And it takes our eye off the ball, and it takes us in areas that we never intended to play in. They become like barnacles on a ship, they just aggregate, and sooner or later we have a business that we never intended. It's unintentional growth.
Yeah.
And it's growth by default rather than by design. That we need to guard against very, very carefully. That's the key point, I think, about controlling growth.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we're talking about growth, and I'm really interested in your thoughts on growth during the pandemic. It's just, I think you and I off air, we were just saying it's just really weird. It's just a really weird market, and you see so many larger agencies. And what are some of the key patterns you're seeing? And then in a minute, we're going to talk about the future as much as we can predict it, right? But what patterns are you seeing, or anomalies that'll help us know maybe we're not alone, or maybe we know what to do with some of the patterns we're seeing? What are some key ones you see?
Yeah, and actually, I do work with smaller independents as well as the large multinationals, and I would say that the dynamics, the patterns are pretty similar, and it
Mm.
goes without saying. Top of the list, the talent war, the
Yeah.
so-called
Mm.
uh,
Yep.
uh, what we're referring to is one of the, I think, most difficult talent markets we've ever been in, and people losing their they're questioning their reason for wanting to be in this business in the first place. They've
Mm.
been able to be a lot more introspective because they've been at home more, and they've been
Yeah.
able to, they're not on airplanes, and
Yeah.
so it's creating more people being a little bit more choosy about what they do. And I would say, especially in our business, which is notorious for burning people out,
Mm-hmm.
making them work long, hard weekends and overtime and extra time for the big pitch, and that
Right.
that that pattern just cycles itself over and over and over again. If you're a
Mm.
senior leader in an agency, you know what that feels like. I mean, just one pitch after another, and it
Yeah.
just, people are just saying, "Hey, wait a minute, life's too short. I don't really want to do that anymore, and I don't have to do it anymore because there are options for me. I can work other places that are not going to require that of me." So
Mm.
the
Okay.
the talent retention piece is goes without saying, one of the
Yeah.
most challenging things going on.
Okay.
But I think just also, let's remember what underlies our talent problems in the first place
Yeah.
is our compensation structure.
Mm.
I mean, businesses that are charging by the hour are, we're never going to be able to afford the best talent. We're the
Wow.
in the agency business, talent is fleeing for client side opportunities. Google can and does pay 30% more in salary to the
Mm.
same person for the
Mm.
same kind of work,
Mm.
day in, day out. So why wouldn't you go work for Google? I mean, you might have some reasons why you might not want to,
Yeah.
but monetarily, and it's a pretty interesting company. So how can they do that? Well, they can do that because they've got a revenue model that's not a one-to-one correlation of, work a million hours, earn $1 million.
Right.
They've got a scalable business where,
Mm.
if you do, and you do this all the time, I'm sure, do the math on revenue per employee inside an
Mm-hmm.
agency. If you're earning $150,000 in revenue per employee, you're probably doing okay. That's average.
Mm-hmm.
Some firms do a little better, and some do worse. You know what it is at Google? It's 1.3 million in revenue per employee. So
That's
you see the difference
unbelievable.
there?
That's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
So they've got the ability to be, because they're selling products and programs. They're not selling hours. They don't
Yeah.
have this. They don't view their inventory as these buckets of hours, and when they're gone,
Mm.
they're gone.
Yeah.
Their inventory is intellectual capital and solutions to business problems, and that can be priced and sold in myriad ways. So that's at the foundation of our problems, and I
Uh-huh.
don't think we should ever lose sight of that. As long
Okay.
as you're on the hourly rate treadmill,
Yeah.
you cannot scale your business, and you
Mm.
cannot afford the best talent.
Man.
Not possible.
Yeah, those are strong words. And we believe those things too. And then a lot of agencies, let's say they got 35 people, they're embedded in the billable hour model, and they're like, how the heck am I going to get out of this? They're like,
Yeah.
okay, I believe you. I read the book. How the
Hmm.
heck do they leave that kind of compensation model so they can step into a real game of growth and
Yeah.
start winning? How do they
Yeah.
do that?
Well, I'll give you a fairly easy answer. I mean, it's a hard question, but the most important thing to do is to reimagine what you do as an agency, not as a bullet point list of services, right? Because those are interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
If you visit agency websites, they pretty much all have the same bullet point list.
Mm.
So is that what clients really buy? No, that's not what they buy. They
Mm.
buy solutions to business problems. They don't buy
Okay.
services. They don't buy competencies. They buy a solution. So to reimagine and re-envision what you do as an agency, not as a list of services, but as a set of programs
Mm.
or solution sets that can be priced in ways that are independent of the hourly rate. that are more valuable, they're more scalable, they're more repeatable. They are much easier to price at a premium because these are valuable bundles of competencies that you've reframed and renamed as a program. Is the easiest and best way to start to get out of the hourly rate model. And this is, I would say, some of the most important work we're doing with agencies right now is this very thing, helping them reimagine their services as solutions.
Okay, and packaging them that way.
Packaging them.
When they sell those. So, so that is that one of the patterns you're seeing. People are going, I got to get out of this billable hour grind. That's a desire you're seeing more and more.
Yeah, definitely, because it relates to as we've seen this hybrid work environment play out, where people don't have to be at desks to be considered at work, right? You can be, especially in the creative services business, we're sometimes working when we're in the shower thinking about a client's problem, and
for sure.
Right, so it redefines what work means, and I think that people start to just see that they have a lot more autonomy and they have a lot more options in the workplace. So the talent retention piece, aside from culture and work environment and making it easy for people to work in an online environment, aside from all that, the monetary considerations, that our ability to pay the best talent, we got to solve that first and foremost, because then none of the other factors matter if we can't come up with an attractive salary.
Okay, right, and that makes sense. And you're saying you can't come up with an attractive salary on an hourly billing model. It's just
not anymore. I mean, this has always been a problem. I think right now it is the central issue in the advertising industry. The central issue.
Wow, that's huge. Now, so in the labor, labor, the talent war is really difficult right now. Are there just not people to hire, or are they just hopping other jobs, or are they going in-house? Like, what's really, somebody's trying to hire, let's say 2 or 3 people, and even senior people, creative directors, these higher ups I think are even more difficult to hire right now. Do those people not exist, or did they go somewhere else, or are they just hopping jobs, or like where the heck are they located?
Yeah. Well, it'd be good to have a definitive answer to that.
Yeah, right.
I the biggest trend I see is they are going in-house. Years ago, you all know this, I mean, especially 10 or 20 years ago, to go client side was like you're selling out.
Right.
Why would you ever want to do that? That's not where the best work is done, et cetera.
Right.
That is no longer true.
Right.
The 70% of major marketers all have a significant in-house capability now, and some of the in-house agencies are very good, and you see some very high-profile talent at high-profile agencies jumping ship to go client side, and you think, wow, that's why would they do that? They're going to hate it. Well, it turns out they're not going to hate it. They're going to be able to do some pretty interesting work. Yeah. I think that's the biggest. And as I said a few minutes ago, the client side organization's ability to pay, because they're not limited by the hourly rate model. Right. They've got a revenue model in which they've got the margins to be able to pay these people well.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing I would worry about if I were running an agency.
Okay. But and it's interesting, right? So these companies people go to just have revenue models. They don't know any other way. It's the professional services that have billable hour models. And so the people they're going to, they don't battle revenue, right? They sell stuff that they offer to people that is valuable, right? That they've always done that, right? And so how the heck did the professional services kind of twist that up and go, let's not have a revenue model, let's sell hours? Like that, I guess, I know Ron Baker talks about kind of the history of how we got that embedded, but why did we ever go down that road in the first place?
Yeah. Well, I mean, law firms were the first, and it was you can read the history of Reginald Heber Smith, an attorney
Okay.
in Boston, who adopted the idea mostly as a means of tracking what kind of work was being done. He never meant it to be a revenue model, which it's not. He never meant it to be a way of monetizing the value of what the firm does, but it turned into that, and then got copied by other professions and eventually ad agencies. And ad agencies had a much better model before, on commissions, and that was a much better model than going to the hourly rate. But yeah, you can read the history of Reginald, history of the billable hour. It's pretty interesting to just see how we got in this mess. But you're right that we're alone. We're pretty much all alone in this.
Wow, way to go!
And it's so it's a mark of our, I don't know what it is, arrogance, inability to think creatively about our own business, because the rest of the business world, they all have a revenue model.
Yeah.
We have a cost structure that masquerades as a revenue model, and
Wow.
it's not the same thing.
Wow, and you're saying that's the biggie right now.
That's the biggie in the future of our business. Absolutely.
Okay.
If we can't afford to pay talented people to work in our industry, which is increasingly difficult, we don't have a business.
Well, okay, so I'm hearing you say people are going in-house. So what is the future of agencies? So, I mean, what do you think the next 2 years will look like? Of course, come on, Tim, you got to tell us the next 2 years.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a pretty short future, but do you see any trends as to what you could say, well, they may be doing this possibly, or do you know or have thoughts?
Well, I think this is going to repeat a couple of things that I've talked about so far. The two biggest, several of the biggest trends are client organizations putting pressure on agencies to not bill by the hour, because they want to pay, they want to pay for outputs, not inputs. So big client organizations, P&G, Unilever, Microsoft, Nestle, big global marketers, they're coming into negotiations with agencies saying, look, we don't want to pay you an hourly rate. We don't want to pay for percent of people and staffing plans. We want to pay you for the actual work you're going to do for us. So could you price the outputs instead of the inputs? And so these client organizations have these big, giant databases of what they call should cost data, right? So a banner ad, digital banner ad that has these elements, quote unquote, should cost X based on global averages.
Wow.
So they're coming in and putting this on the table with agencies, and agencies are unprepared to have the discussion or to push back, because they just bill by the hour. Well, we bill, we do digital banner ads, but we just add up our time, send you a bill. So the move toward outputs versus inputs, I put very high on the top of the list of the future impacting agencies. And that's impacting our revenue model. It's forcing us to move away from billable time. And the other is, which I just referenced, the productization of the agency business. So rather than this a la carte, buffet of, well, I want, a little bit of graphic design and a little bit of media placement, and agencies are now realizing, especially the multinationals, that they've got to package up what they do in more meaningful ways that are more solution centric, like the consultancies do. I mean, McKinsey does a good job with this. I would say that this explains a lot of the success of Accenture and the other consulting businesses that are buying up some really good agencies. They're productizing the professional services business.
Wow.
And so if you're not, as an agency, if you're not doing either of those two things, you're going to be caught off guard. If you're not trying to at least morph your pricing toward outputs instead of inputs, and if you're not trying to productize in some form, you're going to be caught. You're going to be behind and caught off guard.
Okay. Well, and so one of my questions was, what's a strategy they need to focus on? And this is one of those, right? To move out of billing by the hour, which I guess stop looking at hours altogether and instead look at your services and package those for the right market and put a price on it. Start to feel what it feels like to price, because pricing is a journey, right? It's just not this magic bullet. It's going to take you time to to slide a price across the table and not be scared, especially when you have no clue what it should be, right? If you don't know how to price, you have to start from ground zero and go, I don't even know what the heck you should be paying me. That's a tough place to be.
Yeah, pricing, for those who've been through this journey, they know it's a little bit of test and learn. And so it's it's an art. It's costing is a calculation. Pricing is a judgment. So those are two different skill sets. It's why client organizations have a chief pricing officer. They have a chief financial officer,
right,
who does the accounting and the costing, but then they have a chief pricing officer with a completely different skill set that does the pricing. Delta has 250 people who work in the pricing department. They're not accountants, they're not CPAs, they don't have a cost accounting background, they're not involved in tax strategy and mergers and acquisitions. They do, their job is evaluating what is the value to our customer of our products and services. So this is what we need in professional services, is to formalize and institutionalize the practice of pricing inside our firms alongside finance, but it's not the same thing.
Wow, that's cool. That's a cool distinction to help people know what to work on. What about the agency owner who's gone through the pandemic now and they're like, you know what, I don't have it in me to switch out of the billable model to go into pricing. I don't have it in me. And some people are going, I need to exit this business. I need to sell. Maybe they're in their 50s. They've done it a long time, and they still have a long career ahead of them. But they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. Are there cautions you would give people, or is selling, maybe that's a good option? What do you think?
Well, I think that I understand that attitude. I think it's been really tiring and taxing, the effects of the pandemic. But I would say the first thing to consider is what would it feel like to get off the hourly rate treadmill? What would that feel like? Instead of having to worry about, we've got this number of people and they've got to all be at least 80% billable, and we've got to have utilization rates of this, or we're not going to make our margins. What if you're able to productize what you do and price based on the program, not the hours, and you were earning margins of 30 or 40%? Would you feel differently about staying in the business? I think you would. Yeah, I think you would.
Right. Because you feel like you're winning, I guess. Right. You're like, we are winning now.
Yeah.
We're profitable.
And you're not just living on the edge all the time. I mean, it's no fun cracking the whip on people. You got to work those hours. You got to bill that time and collect the timesheets and do the input and then beat people up in their reviews for not, I mean, that's not very professionally fulfilling. And it's also a really suboptimal way to run a business. So I can't tell you how many, and I'll bet you've had this experience too, Jason, how many professionals report how liberating it is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
To move away from hourly billing. It's just like a giant weight has been lifted from them.
Yeah.
And they're able to focus on doing the things that they enjoy, the reasons they got into the business in the first place, rather than constantly sweating about, are we going to make our numbers?
Yeah. Now, but if you have an agency that does have a billable model embedded in that, there's some level of expectation with their clients even at that point. And some know they get billed by the hourly rate. What if does the next bill, they just round it off, right? It's like hey, I know it's always $21,460, but it's just going to be 25 grand a month from now on. We're switching to value pricing.
Yeah.
How do you do it in the moment? Do you go to a client that trusts you and say, we want to start moving in a different direction and we want to begin with you? Do you have to do it with a trusted client first and wade slowly into switching off of hourly to, value pricing?
Well,
or is that the way you do it?
Yeah, I mean, this'll sound a little heretical, but I mean, I don't use the language value pricing, especially with clients.
Okay.
Because I think to them it sounds like, well, you're trying to extract a little more money from me, right? Value pricing. I call it output based or solution based.
Okay.
I mean, it's not to say I never call it value pricing, but I
Yeah.
try not to, and certainly with a client. And so, to your question of what do you do with a current client that's used to receiving a $21,000 bill every month, I do have a specific answer to that, and that is to sit down with that client and just say, look, we've been working together, several years now. We have a pretty good understanding of your business. We have a pretty well-defined scope of work that we know what the expectations are. How would you feel if in the coming year, instead of reporting hours and activities and people, which are inputs, that instead we reimagine that same work as outputs, so that what appears on your invoices and on our contract and documentation is their outputs. It's actual work product, the actual deliverables instead of the inputs of people. Same price.
Yeah.
Not looking for more money. Same price, same scope of work, same team, same people. We're just going to reframe what used to be described as inputs as outputs. Would you be okay with that? Answer is always sure. Yeah, fine. Same work, same people, same team, same price. Sure. Why not?
Okay. Yeah.
And by doing that, you've just done a very important thing, because you've changed the conversation with that client.
Wow. It sounds so simple, but I've never thought of it that way. Because I think, well, even I perceive it, if I'm going to help a client move off of billable hour to value pricing, they're like, oh, I got to figure out how to price my stuff 25% higher. And this way you're like, no, just nothing changes. Can we stop tracking hours and stop sending you a bill based on hours, and we'll send you the same bill? It's just going to be the same every month.
Yeah, it's going to be, and it's going to describe the outputs. So then you've changed the conversation, and you've also opened the door to maybe introduce some other pricing approaches with that client in the future. For example, in addition to this retainer or the fixed price for fixed scope based on outputs, you could introduce maybe a subscription product to that client in the coming year. So they're buying a performance dashboard from you. So rather than billing that by the hour, you're going to serve that up as a subscription, and or a social media programming. There are a lot of good candidates for things that agencies already do that can be reimagined and repackaged as programs that can then be offered via subscription. So with that same client, you're going to introduce some additional other revenue streams and pricing methodologies, so that over time, that client is paying you in multiple different ways, that none of which have to do with the hourly rate.
I love that. I like you saying, just really changing the conversation with a client is probably bigger than we realize, because a client is probably even maybe unknowingly going, yeah, I would get them to do that, but they're going to send me another bill. But instead, if they know they're going to have a conversation with you about how awesome this idea is and how much their partner is going to help them pull this off in the market or whatever, it starts to change how they feel about looking to their partner for help, instead of scared of them and how many hours they're going to rack up and send to them. It's changing the conversation sounds huge, bigger than I thought.
Well, it's like the behavioral psychologists teach that language is the precursor to behavior change. like all revolutions begin with language.
Yeah.
So that's what we want to be part of the pricing revolution that's happening in other businesses. And the way we do that is by first changing our language. And so we change the conversation with our clients where we're not talking about hours and people and time and rates and labor and, all of that. We're going to trade that language, which is the language of cost. We'll trade that for the language of value.
Yeah.
And then we'll be having the right conversation with the client. That's huge. I mean, it's that language is full of meaning. There's a term for it, performativity. I mean, a word is packed with meaning.
Yes, yeah. I love that. And that's true. And that's why in the work we do, professional services, it always requires client education, right? There's always this methodical walk with that human through explaining what you mean, what value is to them, how you're possibly a right fit for them. And I think we often get frustrated in the humans that we serve, but they're just as needy to understand our language as much as we are when we're speaking it. And so it takes time to walk through that. And so a lot of these professional models need to deliberately be slower to do that important work of that human to human interaction, I feel.
So true. The so-called value conversation.
There you go. Yeah, that's what that is. Well, let me ask you about another pattern we've seen in agencies, and it's the opposite of of what what we were just talking about. Some agencies are killing it. They're even going, what the heck is going on? And so we're talking, 40, 50% margins. And they're like, what the heck is going on? When's the shoe going to drop? Actually, there's fear embedded in, this is not normal. The pandemic did this to me. It seems like it should not have. How do they spend that cash? A lot of times we find they're actually not spending cash they should. They're overwhelming themselves as the owner and not investing in roles and team for future growth, because that's investment in future growth. What should they do when their margins are so extremely high? Is that a time to put on growth and hire people that you just can't find, or how would you consult with them?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think a lot of the firms that are, as you say, killing it right now, some of them are in categories that have benefited from the pandemic, right? Like every healthcare agency that I work with is having their best year ever.
That's right.
So that's obviously not going to last forever. But in terms of what to do with the money, the first tendency, and you and I talked about this, and it's the right instinct, I think, because we're a people business, is let's take that money and invest in the talent that we thought we couldn't afford.
Yeah.
But I think there's something we need to do before that. And I just wrote a blog post about it.
Nice.
Could we invest the money in developing these programs and productizing what we do as a first step? Because that falls in the category of, we never have the money to do that because we just live hand to mouth. We bill the hours and collect the revenue and hire the people, and it's this vicious cycle that you just never get out of. So if you've got the cash, why not invest it in developing these programs that are going to be a sustainable part of your business model? These programs are repeatable, they're scalable, they're hard for your competitors to imitate. They're much easier to value price, like we've just talked about. So take the time and money that you've got from having a good year to set yourself up to be more like Google, right? That's not dependent on people billing hours on timesheets.
Yeah. No.
There's a point of view that in the future, agencies will earn the majority of their revenue from IP, not from labor.
Wow.
And so start setting the stage for that, I think, is what I would do with any significant amount of extra cash.
Okay. Well, and from that, it sounds like, Tim, you're saying that's what's coming. That's a world we're moving into where
Yeah.
the hourly rate model is just really going to fall apart even more so than it has in the past. And you're saying counter against that and start investing in what does work and will always work, which is selling a product that's
Yeah.
valuable to somebody that will buy it.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly right. Sounds simple, but that's it. That's
Yeah.
the point.
Well, so if you're saying invest in that, then as we close out here, is that a new position in a company that says go research that, or
Mm.
what could investing that money be to create products and services? It's probably some kind of positioning, branding, exercising. I would imagine.
Mhm.
Is that what they should be spending money on?
Well, yeah, I mean it's a really good point that you can't take the same team that is currently serving clients and billing time and say, hey, now redirect your focus on this product development. I mean, you need to have a devoted person, and there's been a lot written about this. Companies that attempt to kind of do both things at once, like
Mm-hmm.
uh, you've got simultaneously in the service model and you've got the same team of people trying to develop the product model. It doesn't work.
Mm.
They're too distracted. They have different mindsets.
Yeah.
You've got to have a person or two or whatever you can afford devoted to the product model to get that off the ground. There's some really interesting Harvard business case studies about that
Mm.
that the importance of don't use the same people to develop your product model. You've
Wow.
got to have a
That's
separate
interesting.
effort. Yeah.
That's interesting. So what you're saying is, Tim, the doers are just not the people to do the strategic creation of some future product model. They're just not going to be the
Yeah.
same people. Actually, they're not meant to be, right? They do need to be
Yeah.
doers and do the graphic design of the logo and keep doing that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you need to hire somebody else or move them from the execution part of
Yeah.
the model over there
Right.
if they're the right person.
Right. If they're the right person, you can just redeploy them, reassign them. Just don't expect they're going to do both jobs, because guess which job's going to get done and which one's going to get ignored.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Client business is always going to come first. The demands of the client
That's
always,
right.
always, always. The product business will be backburnered, and then a
Yeah.
year from now, the principals of the firm will conclude, hey, this doesn't work. This product development thing, it doesn't work. Well, it hasn't worked because you haven't devoted the people and the resources to develop it. You've got the same people working on that are working on client business. And guess what? They're perpetually distracted
Yeah.
by
Well,
client
and
business.
yeah, that makes sense. Well, it's something you and I have heard before too, right? It's like, well, I tried hourly billing, or I tried value pricing. It didn't work
Yeah.
in our firm. It's like, well, there's
Right.
probably more to that. Like, you probably have a few follow-up questions for somebody who's tried it and it didn't work.
Right. Yeah. Because it works in virtually every other business on the planet. So
Right. Yeah.
apparently it does work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but there's something wrapped around value pricing. It's like this ethereal thing, and all we're doing is just asking people to pay for stuff we sell. I mean, it's what every
Yeah.
other I buy a pair of shoes. It's the same thing. It's like, do
Yeah.
you want them? They cost this much money, and you don't have to buy them, but you can if you want to wear these
Right.
shoes. It's
Yeah.
really no different.
It's the same concept. It's, Adam Smith taught this 200 years ago. He said, nobody ever buys a product or service. We buy the utility that the product or service
Mm,
creates in our lives. And
yeah.
so it's the same thing. We're just trying to evaluate what is the utility and the usefulness of what we do to our clients, and what kind of a price should we attach to that
Yeah.
versus ours, which is
Right.
a completely different thing.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. I love it. All right, Tim. We're up with time, so I think people need to read Positioning for Professionals. That's one of the greatest books on positioning that you wrote that's influenced me. How do people sign up for your blog? That's really a strong piece of content. I don't know if you do that Propulsion
Yeah.
blog monthly. I
Yeah.
think it's kind of
Yeah.
the cadence, I guess.
Yes,
So
it's monthly. And so that's at ignitiongroup.com.
okay.
And you just scroll down on any of the pages and subscribe to propulsion. And then LinkedIn also, on my profile, you'll see I generally try to write and publish there at least monthly as well. And they're usually on the topics that we've been talking about today, either positioning strategy or pricing strategy, one of the two.
Yeah, it's really good stuff. Okay, Tim, thank you so much for being on the Businessology Show. We really appreciate you. I appreciate your friendship and have known you for many years, and you've been a great influence on me and our business and a lot of things that we do too. So thank you for that. We appreciate
thank you.
It.
The feeling is mutual. I think you're an inspiration to our entire business, Jason. So keep up the great work.
Thanks so much, Tim. Thanks for being on the show. We appreciate you.